Well, good morning, everyone. Today is April 16th. This is the Myth-Informed show hosted by Brian and Dimitri. Today we have an amazing guest on, Robyn Blumner. She is president and CEO of the Center for Inquiry, which, as of 2016, encompasses the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. With 10 years of experience as executive director of the ACLUs in Utah and Florida, 16 years as an editorial writer and syndicated columnist, as a expert in church and state separation, establishment clause, free speech and privacy issues, as well as civil liberties and civil rights. Welcome, Robyn.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Last time I spoke with you, the Richard Dawkins Foundation had not merged yet with the CFI. How's that transition going, and how do you feel about it?
It's going fantastically well. The missions of the two organizations are perfectly aligned. The mission of CFI is to foster a secular society based on reason, science, freedom of inquiry, and humanist values. And I think you could pretty much replicate that mission for the Richard Dawkins Foundation. So there was really no cultural hurdles to overcome. It was really a meeting of minds. And it's been a great transition, very smooth. The CFI staff is incredibly talented. I know that you know many people involved with the organization, and they were very welcoming of me and the staff at the Richard Dawkins Foundation. I think there's really a lot of excitement for this marriage. I think it was dubbed by Hemant the royal marriage, or one of the one of the secular world's writers gave it that. And I really don't think we should live in a society run by kings and queens, but I'm honored by the designation. And right now, I think, is an incredible time for the secular world in general. You know, we are in the ascendancy. Our numbers and our ranks are growing in leaps and bounds relative to the shrinkage of many religious faiths. So I think we're really poised to make the most of the opportunities that are coming our way.
Well, and from the projects you guys have going on, I mean, we've been reading through them. They sound unbelievable. And, you know, Brian and I have obviously different interests, and we highlight ones over others. So for me, specifically, this spotlight on freedom of conscience that you guys are doing with the UN Human Rights Council, that to me was fascinating. Did you have anything that you could talk about that there?
Oh, absolutely. So Michael Dodora is the Director of Government Affairs for the Center for Inquiry, and he is our representative to the UN Human Rights Council, and primarily his focus is on challenging blasphemy laws wherever they exist. There are literally dozens of nations around the country where it's illegal to engage in blasphemous speech, which can be as innocuous as simply proclaiming your personal disbelief in God. That can lead to arrest, imprisonment, even in some countries, in fact, 13 nations around the world, the death penalty. Mm-hmm. So Michael is shining a spotlight on those issues, and he's incredibly effective considering, you know, we have one person who's doing this work. It's as though, you know, he's 3 in 1. He goes routinely to Geneva, Switzerland, where the UN Human Rights Council meets. He goes routinely to the UN headquarters in Manhattan and represents those views. Not only that, but there's another piece of the work that Michael does called the Secular Rescue Project.
Yeah, we noticed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it used to be called the Free Thought Emergency Fund, but we thought rebranding it slightly to Secular Rescue really gave it the punch it needed and was a little more explanatory as to what it actually does. This is a program that literally saves lives. I think at last count, it was 37 or 39 people whose lives we've saved as a result of Secular Rescue. So this is a program that goes into countries like Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia and rescues bloggers and thinkers and artists and writers who are non-believers and willing to say as much, and as a result have their lives threatened. We've seen this primarily in Bangladesh. There's been a raft of violence against secular bloggers. And
right, being knifed in the street publicly as people are walking around. I mean, it's extraordinary.
In the street, people macheted to death simply because they are thinking out loud in a rational way on the internet and living in Bangladesh at the same time. And we have connected with this community. We have helped to ferret out, dozens of people, relocated them to safe locations, places like Canada and Germany and Norway and even India, just to get out of harm's way. And it's been incredibly successful. Of course, the demand outstrips our ability to help. So anyone who's listening who wants to designate a contribution to that program can give to CFI with a designation for secular rescue, and that money will go toward that project. And we help to underwrite people's airfare and their living expenses once they get to a safe place for a short period of time until they can get on their feet.
Oh, and how are you vetting that these folks are, there is some skepticism about, well, is someone actually, an active, say, blogger or person who's trying to get out of a country versus trying to leave for financial reasons. So I assume that you guys do vetting that these are actual secularists who are, indeed in danger.
This is Michael's baby, and he has done a superb job in ensuring that we don't get played, if you will.
Right.
The secular community is a very small, tight-knit community in many of these locations. People know one another, and it's easy to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff because you just have to ask around the network, and they'll tell you whether this person's legitimate or not and whether they are actually facing persecution or direct threats against their life. So we do vet. We do make sure that whoever's coming to us for help and receives that help is deserving.
Yeah, and I think that this program, that's amazing that you 29, 39 people, what you're getting up to, that this is huge. And you're getting individuals that are really in danger and are folks that actually will fit very well into our community. I mean, these are people that would love America, love Canada, love the West, and that's awesome. And I think it's only going to the need is only going to grow because you've also opined on the Facebook and Facebook and its relation to Pakistan. And specifically, the issue is there. The Pakistani government is asking Facebook to give up the IDs and the locations of folks who post on social media saying anything that might be offensive or blasphemous. I mean, wow. Now Facebook has to be part of this to sell out somebody that now is really in danger. This is incredible. And you're opposing that as well.
Exactly. We've issued a press release. We have appealed to Facebook directly. We know that were Facebook to cooperate, many more lives would be in danger, certainly of arrest and probably of worse.
Yeah.
So we hope that Facebook does the responsible thing and not cooperate with a request like this. We also hope, though, that the country of Pakistan doesn't shut down Facebook as a platform for social media. We've seen that in the past where countries that don't particularly like the freedom that is given their citizenry on these platforms reacts by simply shutting them down or censoring them in some way. So we're walking a fine line between desperately wanting Facebook to to not cooperate with this request from Pakistan, but also knowing that if they don't do something in that direction, they risk being precluded entirely from the country. And then that opportunity for communication and connection within Pakistan is lost.
Yeah, that's tough because you would think that would be the logical step for a strict Pakistani government to take. It's just to outlaw Facebook. In the same way that that when I go to Google's homepage and if I'm in Shanghai versus, if I'm here in Wisconsin, I'm going to get a different Google. Mm-hmm. There's certain searches that are not going to pick up things critical of the Chinese government.
And it really is a Hobson's choice to some degree for these technology companies because they understand that if they don't play ball, at least to some degree, they'll be barred from the country. Now, of course, they have an economic and business interest in having that not happen, but the people of that country also have an interest in having access to really a worldwide audience when they can participate in social networks.
Yeah. And we don't have to, go that far from home to even find situations where we need assistance from a legal standpoint. You're doing work here, both in Florida with the Take Action Now and the, the Free Speech Fairness Act in Congress that I think you're actively helping to oppose. These are examples of right here at home where we have religious freedoms, so to speak. No, secular freedoms under attack.
The Trump administration and the Republican-led Congress are not friends of ours. The understatement
Shocker.
Of the century. And we are certainly worried about a whole variety of bills that are coming down the pike and actions that Donald Trump and his administration intend to make. We see this also filtering out at the state level. There seems to be a new aggressive stance towards Planned Parenthood, towards abortion rights, towards gay and lesbian couples, and states, particularly red states, conservative states, are looking at passels of retrograde legislation that would directly affect the issues that we lobby on and advocate on. The CFI has a variety of interests. On the one hand, we are concerned about humanism, humanist values, church-state separation. We certainly promote the idea that religion should be held up to the same scrutiny as any other idea, any other claim about the physical world, any other ideology. But we also have a skeptical side as well, where we assert our interest in medical claims and whether those are true and whether claims of the paranormal are true and psychic ability. And we debunk and investigate those kinds of people who say that they can communicate with the dead, or who say they can cure you by giving you basically what is a water tablet.
Yeah.
So we run the gamut of quite a lot of legislation that comes down the pike. But anything that we feel has been derived from religious orthodoxy or religious dogma is something we tend to object to. So if any of your listeners are wondering, well, why is CFI involved in the gay equality and same-sex marriage rights or abortion rights? Well, we know that opposition to those policies emanates primarily from religious dogma and theology.
No doubt.
So if you use that as a guide, you will know where CFI plants its public policy flag. That is, wherever there's dogma in law, we are going to be opposing it.
Right. If the argument for pro-life or anti-abortion were made from a wholly secular place, and that argument can be made. I mean, Christopher Hitchens would sometimes advocate for a certain portion of that. I don't think the CFI would be getting involved. It's because it is many times coming from a religious bent and advertised as so.
Exactly. So people who say, well, are you just a liberal organization? Is that it? Just progressive ideas, whatever they are, you're for them? No, there is actually ideology behind the positions that we take. And we are rigidly in favor of church-state separation. And so, we're very concerned about the repeal of the Johnson Amendment, for instance, which Trump made a clarion call during his presidential campaign, and where we already are seeing moves in that direction. We are stridently opposed to the expansion of private school vouchers, not because we are against school choice per se, but because 80, 85, 90%, depending upon the state, of taxpayer-funded private school vouchers go to underwrite religious education. Wow. Religious education where typically the school discriminates against teachers on the basis of religion, so that if you're applying to be a math teacher at this school and you happen to be an atheist, you would not be considered for that post, because only teachers that subscribe to that school's theology would be considered. And taxpayer money is going to underwrite that kind of education. So these are all of a whole. These ideas, these principles, these policy stances, you can predict them.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's interesting that there is a stereotype associated with atheists perhaps being progressive or left of the spectrum, when you have potentially a growing movement on the right that's trying to disassociate itself from the religious right and say, hey, we're conservatives, we're maybe fiscal conservatives, but we don't ascribe to some of these social ideas that the religious right does.
We just have to remember Ayn Rand was an atheist. Yeah. So Paul Ryan, who lionizes her, conveniently forgets that fact.
I know that it's funny. I when I read some of these, pieces that it's described, I think that the Freedom of Speech Act, that's wow. I want to support that. But you're talking about freedom of religious speech, in a publicly funded school. Yet they're not mentioning, you're opening the door for things that they don't like. The right seems to be very much against Islamism. And I think, that the secular left can be upset about that too. Why do you not see it? You're opening the door for fundamentalist Muslims to do the same thing as Christians. Why open that gate? Why not just no privileges for religion at all? That seems to be a solid conservative position to me. That's why both of us agree. I think I'm 2 inches right of center. Dimitri's 2 inches left of center. We both agree with most of the CNFI's initiatives. I don't believe you're a partisan organization at all.
Exactly. And we should remember that the Establishment Clause was adopted in large measure to protect religion. That the freedom given to religious exercise in America is contingent upon the government not providing largesse to these religious institutions, because with money comes strings, comes oversight. Religion needs to have its own space to operate without dictates from the state. And of course, pastors and rabbis and imams see government money, and it sort of blinds them to the reality that they are playing with Caesar, and they will suffer the consequences for that.
No doubt. And it's not even just the religious that can do this. You've got a case where, and I thought it was excellent, you're talking about a case in Denmark where a person has burned the Holy Quran, and he's on trial for a form of blasphemy in a a very Western secular country like Denmark, I mean, that's outrageous. And you mentioned the fundamental rights that allow a religious believer to freely profess the divinity of a holy book allows someone else to defile that book, and that's exactly correct. And I think you guys are playing it fair across the board. You're not okay with that.
It's so clear to people who understand principles that my free speech and your free speech are inextricably tied, and that when you allow my free speech to be circumscribed, you're directly affecting your own freedom. I find it astounding how that eludes so many people.
Me too. Thank you for saying that. I'm often confused on this, and it seems like campus of all places, academia is the center point, at least in America, for free speech issues. And to me, I'm like, wow, academia ought to be the place for free speech. I went to Notre Dame, a very conservative Catholic college, yet my theology 101 professor was a Protestant. That to me, that was liberalism. That was, okay, let's exchange ideas. This is great.
Well, we've gone back and forth a little bit about the fact that may be a fringe movement. And if you focus on, Berkeley or other California institutions of higher learning, and you say, well, this is representative of every campus, in America, that may not necessarily be true.
That, of course, is an accurate statement. That said, there is a disturbing pattern emerging where conservative speakers are being prevented from giving speeches and talks and being on panels because of a backlash by the student body and even rioting. It's completely unacceptable. And I really just don't understand what kind of bubble these young people grew up in if they think that freedom of speech means you will never get offended. It's just the opposite.
Yeah.
And I wish, of course, my background is with the ACLU. I headed the ACLU of Utah. I headed the ACLU of Florida. When I was head of the ACLU of Florida, we had to defend Two Live Crew. Two Live Crew was a rap group, and they put out an album called As Nasty as They Want to Be.
Oh, you're bringing me back.
And this record album had incredibly graphic lyrics. It was very misogynist too.
Indeed.
But there was a sheriff in Broward County named Nick Navarro who had it out for this group. The guys lived and played music in his county, and he targeted them, tried to arrest them when they were singing their music. One record store owner was arrested for selling As Nasty as They Want to Be to an adult undercover officer.
Wow.
So it was determined that in Nick Navarro's mind that this album was legally obscene, and therefore adults could not be sold the album. That is an incredibly dangerous society to live in.
Absolutely.
When some, Southern sheriff decides what kind of music is legal. So the ACLU got involved. We helped to represent Two Live Crew. We helped to represent the record store owner. Eventually, the album was found to be not legally obscene, and therefore you could possess it and sell it without worrying about the criminal justice system coming down in your head. And Two Live Crew could sing their songs without fear of arrest. But imagine what that took. It took lawyer time and court time, incredible resources in order to protect something that seems so obvious. Well, I don't understand why so many college students today don't see the danger in that. And if they start demanding the censorship for ideas they don't like, they find distasteful, they find obscene or objectionable, then very soon something dear to their hearts will be censored. And they could even look at jail time themselves for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person in the wrong place. We have our civil rights today because the First Amendment is so broad and so protective of speech. I mean, can you imagine if a Southern town could have shut down the civil rights movement by simply saying that the speech was objectionable and offensive?
Yeah, I mean, right. And I'm sure that people would say that it was offensive, but that was the point. You don't have the right not to be offended. You don't.
Yeah, think about it in terms of an issue the progressives love, which is abortion rights. So you have a pro-choice march through a Catholic town. Mm-hmm. And the Catholic town says, we think this is the promotion of murder and genocide. And so we're passing an ordinance saying that there cannot be speech that promotes genocide, shutting down pro-choice speech.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing. That's the reverse. Absolutely. That I'm against that, but I'm also against, let the arguments go on the way to their merit rather than shutting them down. It seems like that this is a thin mask for a very real insecurity when you have to shut down that free speech.
Well, it is tough to say on the other hand, because, we don't let Nazis march and we say that that's inflammatory, that's hate speech. So
we do let Nazis march. We absolutely do let them march. They have a First Amendment right to march.
Well, I think that there's less of them. I used to, when I was younger, I would see on TV, wow, here comes the KKK through Skokie, right? I mean, that's pretty bad. But I mean, the counter protests would all line up. Nothing really would happen. They'd get booed. And it seems like there's just less of that happening. There's, the KKK, the real Nazis, the real racists, there's just a lot less of them, I think.
I don't know if you look at wacko right-wing
alt-right,
internet discussions, there seem to be plenty.
I mean, there are real racists out there, but then this is my problem with the distinction. Yes, I've gone to some of these alt-right sites to check them out, and that they do say absolute racist things like democracy would never have evolved in a culture that wasn't ethnocentric, that European-centric, right? Mm-hmm. That it couldn't evolve in Africa or Asia or another place. Wow, that's racist. But then to conflate anyone that says, I want to go to a Ben Shapiro talk and you call him a white supremacist or her, that's ridiculous. So I think that racist is losing its meaning. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm concerned about. Yes, I do want to pick on the true alt-righters, but not just garden variety conservatives.
Oh, people misuse that term all the time. I mean, racist you're absolutely right, lost its meaning. It's at its core elevating one race over another. If someone says something that is stereotypical of a race, that may not necessarily be racist. So, I mean, it's kind of checking what kind of semantics you're using when you're talking to someone or labeling them for that matter.
Yeah, and Robyn, do you think that identity politics has helped foster this? Because I do see more people going to alt-right as ish positions, that almost like the credibility is strengthened by the kind of the anti-fascist left, which to me sounds fascist, kind of gives credibility to the right and vice versa. Then the rise of the alt-right sort of gives the extreme left some credibility. To me, I don't like any identity politics. It fractures communities.
Yes, I absolutely agree that identity politics has done a disservice, I think, particularly to progressive causes. We have Donald Trump in the White House today because enough of the population of America is sick of identity politics that they registered a vote for a guy completely unqualified for the job.
Yeah. Like in no other environment would a Donald Trump get elected. I think it was that bad that happened. And I tend to agree with you there. I mean, it was just an unfortunate series of events. And I think we need to ask ourselves every day, are we in a bubble? Because if you're not asking yourself that, like, you're likely to get trapped in it.
Well, and now that he's here, I mean, we have certain repercussions, not all of which are necessarily negative. So I would say, there's a recent CNN article about you guys, actually, the CFI, and how the appointment of Neil Gorsuch has really, quote, galvanized the movement of the nuns. And we actually wanted to ask if you've seen a remarkable rise in your membership and really engagement with the secular community because of the rise of the hard right.
There's been a bump in membership. There's been increased interest in the work we do. It's not on the same level that some other groups have seen a response, like the ACLU or Planned Parenthood, and they're just off the charts. I think everyone who was surprised and disgusted the day after the election results joined one of those two groups. But nonetheless, there is a sense of increased threat to our community, and that helps to galvanize cohesion and support. Neil Gorsuch very likely will be a vote against church-state separation and for religious privileging. I mean, we know that when he was on the 10th Circuit, he was a vocal proponent in the Hobby Lobby case of giving businesses a religious exemption on the basis of the free exercise clause. So every indication is that Neil Gorsuch will be bad news for our community. So that just puts us back to status quo ante, the same situation we had when Justice Antonin Scalia was alive. But if there's one additional conservative that replaces a liberal justice, we could very well see non-believers consigned to potted plant status in law. I mean, seriously, where the free exercise clause is interpreted in a way that snubs out the rights of non-believers, and the Establishment Clause is interpreted to say basically that government can't discriminate among religions, but it can prefer religion over non-religion.
Right. No, and I think you're convincing me a little bit. And Robyn, this is where, and I'll try to play devil's advocate a little bit, and I'm kind of mixed on this issue of Neil Gorsuch, because you've written in on it. To me, I kind of think the judges need to call things impartially, because you could pass the exact legislation that you wanted through Congress, and then any activist judge, whether you're on one side or the other, could tip that over. So to me, I do want judges to be a little bit more originalist, a little bit more strict construction, and that's what I see Neil Gorsuch as. Why is that a bad thing? I guess convince me, because to me, I guess I don't see him necessarily. I mean, just because I may advocate for a position, but I don't want some other judge to where we get the legislation passed to overturn it. Why isn't this more Congress's issue as opposed to the judiciary?
Don't get fooled by terms like strict constructionist and originalist. Those are just shields for justices to rule the way they want to. And Scalia was the worst example, claiming to be an originalist, looking to what practices were in the 18th century in order to evaluate a constitutional claim today. Well, he really only did that here and there. Let's take the example of the gun control case, the Heller case, where Scalia wrote the majority opinion. It was a 5-4 ruling. And he claimed that he was looking back to the time of the founding of our country to determine whether the Second Amendment protected the rights of individuals to possess firearms, or whether this was a right that was at the state level for a well-regulated militia. And of course, he came out to say that, in fact, the individual has the right to bear arms, and they have the right to do so for self-defense, and they have the right to do so to foment revolution. Well, if you take a principle like that to its logical conclusion and apply it today, if one of the purposes of giving people arms was that they could overturn their government on a regular occasion, like Thomas Jefferson said one should do occasionally, then individuals would have rights to the kinds of munitions that are of modern warfare, tanks and bazookas and bombs and missiles and nuclear warheads, which of course is ridiculous. Scalia also talked extensively about the restrictions on the right to bear arms that he would find acceptable. There was no way he was channeling some 18th century idea about gun control in this modern version of originalism. He just simply used the originalist label as protection for his claims and did not stick with the ideas that really were emanating in the 18th century. Oh. So Gorsuch may claim that he's a strict constructionist and an originalist, but ultimately it's just an excuse for him to rule in a retrograde manner whenever he deems it necessary.
So your argument is not so much against strict constructionism or originalism in so much of the concepts of them. Your argument is that he's not really one of them.
Well, that they're false
That he
concepts.
can be activist in another way.
They are activists in another way.
Okay. That's a fair argument then.
For moneyed interests and big government.
Okay, I think sometimes that gets confused. Where those that there are others that are bashing on just the concept of originalism, and then that's get mixed up with perhaps saying that Neil isn't one of them. Yeah, so that's a different argument. So absolutely fair.
Are we talking about bringing back the stocks? Are we talking about bringing back whipping as a punishment?
Some people
existed in the 18th century. No, we have a constitution which allows for evolving standards of decency.
Yeah,
so when we are interpreting the Eighth Amendment, we are applying modern standards of what's acceptable as a punishment.
Right. Yeah. The pillory seems ridiculous these days.
But if a true originalist would have to find that acceptable.
Yeah. Okay. And that you're right. I think that it is a balance. That there's things that just don't make sense. Obviously the Constitution started with, slaves, and 3/5 of a vote. Obviously that's overturned and with later amendments, but you can't go back to, well, let's vote in slavery again. That doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. And so we do talk about the right a lot, and with the current political climate, it also kind of makes sense, and we touched on this earlier, to talk about the left. So in 2014, you wrote this, what both of us would consider a brilliant article, What the Right Doesn't Get About Religious Freedom. So fast forward 2 years from there to today, would you say the script has kind of flipped to an extent, and perhaps some on the left deserve similar criticism for their double standard regarding, let's say, fundamentalist Islam over Christianity? So we give some passes to Islam just because it's maybe politically correct to do that.
And minority faith in the West.
Yeah.
There is a strain within the progressive movement that doesn't seem to recognize the harms done to women, minorities, non-believers, gay people by the Islamic faith, particularly where it's a state religion. I don't quite understand it, just like I don't completely understand the impulse to shut down conservative speakers on college campuses, but making common cause with people who would deny your right to personhood is absurd. I mean, so self-defeating. The humanist progressive values that the liberal left claims to embrace are the antithesis of Wahhabism. And to somehow claim that if you're criticizing the acts of Wahhabism, the policies, the theology of Wahhabism, that is somehow a prejudiced act that you're an Islamophobe for is absurd. Richard Dawkins likes to say, I'm not an Islamophobe. I'm a genital mutilation phobe, and I'm a anti-death penalty for non-believers phobe. And just list every kind of condition of law in Saudi Arabia that's grounded in Sharia that does damage to the rights, liberties, and dignity of religious minorities, women, and gay people. It really is beyond my understanding how come it's the feminists on college campuses who stand so firmly protecting the rights of Islamic students not to hear any criticism of religious practices or religious ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then then can be very mad at, say, the Westboro Baptists or fundamentalist Christians when they do batty things. And the right has a similar blind spot in that they want special privileges for their religions, but don't realize that's going to open the door for certain Islamic centers to bring in radical speakers. And how do you not see that? What goes for you goes, you got to give it to the Wahhabis then. And obviously they don't want that. Why can't we just agree to a level playing field? I mean, right and left. And I guess these are the extremes, but it's infuriating to me too.
What's testing that right now is this wonderful Satan movement that a couple of atheists have launched, who put Satanist images in holiday displays and next to 10 Commandments.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
created the Satanist coloring books for distribution in schools if there's some kind of religious tract that's going through a school. It's really hysterical to see these administrators and government officials tie themselves in knots trying to somehow differentiate why a Christian image is acceptable but a Satanist image is not.
Oh, absolutely. But on the other hand, I mean, isn't it kind of counterproductive? And Robyn, you feel free to be, honest here, because I've had people ask, or I've heard, well, you're an atheist, so do you believe in the devil? Or do you worship the devil, I should say? And, to have to walk that back and go, well, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. And then they'll point to some guy online who's, praying in a pentagram. And I'm like, well, that's just a weirdo. That's not an atheist.
And this group is just doing it to make a point. They're being as provocative as they possibly can and getting those results. I don't think it's particularly counterproductive because so many people out there mistake atheists for Satanists.
Absolutely.
That if we just play with the joke, I actually think it helps to differentiate us because we're bringing attention to it.
I guess that's a really good point. I don't think we've taken it from that perspective.
That's good. It's an interesting one to come up with. I think the other is that the March for Science, right? That you've written, and I'll quote you here in an article, that science has always been under relentless assault from those who finds its conclusions inconvenient, leading us into darkness for reasons of greed, power, superstition, dogma, or magical thinking. And that's brilliant. And I do believe, the March for Science, when I see these, I want to support it. To me, I like the scientific method. I think that's the true fair space to be able to share and reject and accept conclusions and ideas. But yet I do even see an element among this that gets me a little weird. There's a regressive element that wants to decolonialize science. Whatever that means, that can your data be too white or Mexican? This is weird to me. What are your thoughts on that? Is this movement, are there anti-intellectuals in that movement, and what do you do?
I think we already established that identity politics can be very damaging. They can divide the left in a way that allows us to spend a lot of time, resources, energy, and emotion fighting with each other instead of fighting our real enemies. Our real enemies are the climate change deniers. They're the people who claim creationism should be taught in schools. They're the people who want to take away women's reproductive rights and the rights of gays and lesbians to live as they wish. Those are our enemies. And I don't know why we spend time spinning our wheels, putting each other up on a purity test and determining whether we have, passed it or not. I want to be friends with everyone who supports science, who agrees with the Enlightenment values that are embraced by science. And I don't care what you look like. If the entire universe of people other than me supporting science were white men, I would be happily part of that club.
Yeah. And that's what I think. Science goes beyond gender, race, or creed, or anything like that. There can be religious scientists, there can be atheist scientists. As long as you stick to the rigors of science, you're fine. If you can agree on the scientific method, you don't have to agree on other things.
Exactly. That was a lesson that I learned a long time ago when I was with the ACLU. You just make your friends where you can for the issues that you share, and don't worry about the rest. A good example of this was Representative Henry Hyde. He was a lawmaker in Illinois. You might think of him when you hear the Hyde Amendment that restricts federal money from going to pay for women's abortions. He was as anti-choice as it comes, but he also cared deeply about civil forfeiture law and whether people were losing possessions, property, and money to police unfairly because there was not enough due process when these items were confiscated. The ACLU worked regularly with Henry Hyde on those issues, even as we were fighting diligently against him on the choice issue. We can do that with the religious issues and the Enlightenment issues and the science issues that we're dealing with now within CFI and the secular movement.
Yeah.
Take our friends where they come.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you don't have to make a pariah out of anyone. Again, you're not rooting for people. We're rooting for ideas.
And just to make a plug for that March for Science movement, that is on April 22nd, and it is in 500 cities across the nation. Obviously, probably the biggest one is going to be in D.C. So if you're interested, those of you listening, definitely take a look and see if there's one in your local area. See if you want to attend, whether you're pro or against. It's probably going to be an interesting gathering.
And if somebody wants to march with the CFI group in your region, just go online, plug in CFI and March for Science, and you'll be able to sign up. There are local leaders around the country who are organizing a presence for CFI at the March for Science in multiple communities. So we'd love to have you. The more people we have under our banner, the more powerful we seem.
Do you have a mission statement specifically for it? Some people say, well, the level of the criticism, it's too general. Is there a specific mission statement associated with it?
There is a March for Science mission statement on their website. They have a series of principles that they are putting forth as their mission. I mean, basically it boils down to the support for the ideas of science, critical thinking, the scientific method, freedom of scientists to engage in their inquiries and to report their results, and for government not to cut funding.
No. Those seem reasonable. I'm sorry I didn't look it up beforehand, but it is important that I think any march have a reasonably specific focus.
Well, it's because there was the criticism of the March for Women that happened, right day of or right after the inauguration it seemed too broad. So even folks who were left leaning, who had some conservative principles, were going, okay, what is this? Why would you march for no reason, essentially, with a very broad statement? So this seems a little more well defined.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Now, and Robyn, we're bringing it back to on atheism, and again, this is another reason why I'm convinced that CFI is not a partisan organization. That you came down pretty hard on the DNC CFO chair. That it turns out WikiLeaks had found that targeting Bernie Sanders, kind of like being partisan within the Democratic category, saying, I draw a big distinction between a Jew and an atheist. Almost if we could cast him as an atheist, we might be able to win in places like West Virginia and Kentucky. And that you're very critical about that as well.
Yeah, and with him being the closest thing to an atheist candidate we've had, we can speculate that he was or wasn't. How close do you think we are to actually being openly supportive of an openly secular candidate in U.S. politics?
You mean for president? I think we're quite a ways away from an openly
even at the local or state president level. Yeah.
Well, there are actually local politicians who are atheist and who have been elected, not to Congress right now, but I think
mayoral candidates. You mean?
And city council. There's someone on the school board. There may be some state lawmakers who are openly atheist. I think it's something like 16 around the country, which isn't very many, considering that the polls show that people willing to say that they are atheist, not even agnostic, atheists, are 3 times the number of Muslims. They're double the number of Jews. We're a big cohort in America, and we have no political representation. So I do think the day is coming with the rise of the secular movement as a movement and the expansion of the nuns. It is really incredible that if you're under 30 today, 4 in 10 of you are going to say that you have no religious affiliation. That is just remarkable, considering how far we've come and how fast. So I do think we're a powerful movement that it just has to harness its power, and groups like CFI are doing that. We're not the only ones, but we're one of the biggest, and that will make a huge difference down the road, because we need to demand political power proportionate to our numbers in the population. That's the thing that's missing. Until we get that, we will always be the also-rans. We will always be marginalized. We will be the people who are told, no, you can't do an invocation at the city council meeting, even though your invocation is about the founding of the nation and church-state separation and being good to one another. So we need political power. The only way to do that is to activate and support groups like CFI, like FFRF, like American Atheists, like American Humanists, all the major secular organizations, the Secular Coalition for America that does lobbying exclusively on behalf of the secular movement. There's a Free Thought Equality Fund, I believe that's what it's called, that is a PAC helping to support candidates willing to be open about their secularism.
Perfect.
So there are places to put your activism and your resources that will really help to move the needle. We've already proven that we're a major proportion of the population. Now we just have to show that we can be a major proportion of the political leadership.
Yeah, and I think because we're not dogmatic, because the secular organizations allow free inquiry, I think you're going to get a much more heterogeneous mix, which is one of the reasons why even the atheist movement isn't always going to agree on issues.
Of course.
So, you don't have it. I mean, it's just, you could apply this to women too. Are women represented? Does it have to be 50-50? I don't think it does, because you're going to see women vote for men and men vote for women because, you can put your gender bias aside and advocate for your values, and we can put our religious bias or non-bias aside, and somebody who's religious could actively support your issues, if they're fair and ethical.
What we need in our movement is social equity. We have legal rights. We have civil rights. Non-belief is protected under federal law. But what we don't have is social equity. People at the rate of 42% still say they would not vote for an otherwise qualified candidate for president if they were an atheist.
Okay. No, that's something. You're right. It is.
Well, it's depressing to an extent that atheists are probably the most marginalized group in this country. Although there's a rise of folks who are critical of Islam, but still, it is considered an immoral movement that doesn't lead to anything good. And there's a lot of misconceptions about it too. So,
well, I think that's why Bradley Marshall, made his pitch to the DNC that they might want to paint Bernie Sanders as an atheist, because even within the Democratic Party, even within the progressive movement, that would undercut a portion of his support. And what's really disgraceful, I think, is that in the whole aftermath, in the recriminations from that, the apologies made were basically to Bernie Sanders supporters and to Bernie Sanders himself, and not to atheists.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. I mean, that you mentioned exactly what the apology ought to have been, and it's a fair one, and they don't make it. I mean, you kind of handed it to them on a silver platter, and it wasn't made.
Mm-hmm. Well, when Bernie was asked point blank about this, Brian and I both thought that his answer was absolutely brilliant. It was off the cuff, and he admitted absolutely nothing, because when
politically brilliant.
Jimmy Kimmel asked him, he says, "You're culturally Jewish. You don't feel religious. Do you believe in God? Do you think that's important for people in the U.S.?" And he says, "Well, I am who I am, and what I believe in, what my spirituality is about, is that we're all in this together. That I think it's not a good thing to believe that as human beings, we can turn our backs on the suffering of other people." That's brilliant. Mm-hmm. That answer is so vague and brilliant at the same time.
It's a humanist answer.
It is. And Dimitri, if you work on it a little more, I mean, there was about 10% of real Bernie's voice in there. If you work on that, you can nail it.
You had a lot of practice there.
A little bit.
I do look up to him, but yes. Talk like him, that's going to take a little while.
Oh, wow. So, Robyn, this has been great. And we love you being an expert at everything that we've sent on here. You've been able to field. Obviously, you're very, very involved. You're not the CEO that doesn't know what's going on. You're right on the grassroots level. Mm-hmm. What's next for the CFI? Like, what's going to be happening? Like, what's your 2 or 5 year plan?
We actually are going through a strategic planning process in May that the wonderful Todd Stiefel is helping us walk through. So we are in the middle of evaluating all the component parts of the organization and deciding what we're going to look like in 2, 5, 10 years. So I can come back on the show in the fall and let you know what was decided by the board of directors. But I think, as I said right at the get-go, that the secular movement is expanding. It's energized. People out there feel like church-state separation is under threat, that religious privilege is coming down the pike because of the Supreme Court and the Trump administration, and they're looking for opportunities to get involved. So I just urge all your listeners to please become part of at least one secular organization out there. We need you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're actually excited because locally our show is now has a much broader reach. So we're now affiliated with WTMJ here in Wisconsin, and it boasts one of the largest coverage areas in the nation. So our reach extends to most of the eastern third of Wisconsin, most of the Chicago area, Grand Rapids, Michigan, etc. So, we'd love to have yourself, perhaps even Richard Dawkins on at some point, just to help spread the message and let people know that it's it's okay to be openly secular.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Yeah, and we feel like, the Mythos Milwaukee organization ultimately supports free inquiry. Our values very much align with CFI, and we're appreciative to talk to the CEO. It's not often that I get to talk to CEOs.
Thank you so much, Robyn.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Myth Informed. Myth Informed is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasick, associate producers Fritz Blondon and Kristen Whitaker Hood, engineer Josh Benishek, technical consultant Jason Lawson, and hosts Brian, Dimitri, Jacob, and Joseph. Every week we produce a new podcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Mythicist Milwaukee also brings major secular conferences and debates to the Milwaukee area, along with community events, both local and online. To support us in bringing future events, become a member at mythicistmilwaukee.com to receive member-only benefits. You can also visit mythicistmilwaukee.com and hit the donate button located at the bottom of each page to place a financial donation amount of your choice. And now, the closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next to die? There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next